On this special edition of The Heat, my one-on-one interview with Syria's foreign minister. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, and this is The Heat. Over the last 2 weeks, world leaders and diplomats have discussed the globe's most pressing issues at the United Nations General Assembly. During my trip to New York, I had the chance to speak with Faisal Mekdad, the Syrian foreign minister and former permanent envoy to the United Nations. The foreign minister discussed a range of issues, including Syria's war, Western intervention, climate change, and his country's diplomatic relations with China. I began by asking him what makes this global gathering so unique.
I think the possibility of meeting so many foreign ministers, dignitaries, and mass media is an opportunity that could not be achieved in any single country in the world. But when all foreign ministers or kings, presidents, emirs meet here, then you have an ample opportunity to exchange a lot of views and understand different developments.
In January this year, Syria officially joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. Can you describe how you see that relationship today, how you see it blossoming in the future?
Since the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and Syria in the late 50s, I think, the relations have been moving forward all the time. I mean, on the one hand, we stand for China. We believe China has led an excellent foreign policy towards all just causes. China has supported all developing countries without any conditions. China has supported Syria both economically and politically, something which we welcome. The Road and Belt Initiative is a courageous step by the Chinese leadership to mobilize more resources for developing countries and others, to have more connectedness between countries and to exchange goods and information as rapidly as possible. So we look forward to having more effective cooperation between Syria and China. But this is not the only part of Syrian-Chinese cooperation. You know, China has used its veto for 10 times in the Security Council for enforcing international law and legitimacy in the Security Council on the issue of Syria. So the relations go beyond the economic aspect between the two countries to a more humanitarian nature of relationship between the two countries.
Infrastructure, though, is such a key part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and clearly Syria, because of the war, needs that effort. Can you describe for me, in terms of an infusion of help towards your country, what does this mean, and can you build on that to perhaps entice more?
Let me tell you very, truthfully, that the infrastructure built in Syria was the best in the Middle East, if not beyond. When the terrorists attacked Syria since 2011, they destroyed a lot of the excellent infrastructure we have built throughout Syria. Now, a lot of the infrastructure is destroyed. What we want to do is to go back to rebuilding Syria. Until now, Western countries, as you are aware, are refusing to say the infrastructure should be rebuilt in Syria. But recent Security Council resolution 2642 has maintained a new position on the need to help Syria in early reconstruction efforts and to rebuild its electric system, its health system, its educational system, its water system, which were all destroyed by the terrorists during the past 11 years. So now, while trying to rebuild the country, we need the help of the international community. And I assure you, China will be one of those leading countries, together with other friends, for the rebuilding of the country.
The United States has basically retreated from the Middle East. It doesn't have as much of a footprint as it did in the past. How is that impacting the region, you think? What's the overall take in Syria?
Frankly speaking, there were some steps to claim that the United States is going now to take action in the East. I mean, in Eastern Asia against China or I mean other countries in the region. The developments in Ukraine has changed the priority, but we do understand that there is no justification for United States troops, neither in the near China nor in the Middle East. I think these, powers, whether Western European, NATO, or the United States, should be kept, where they are. We don't have the same confrontations. Warsaw Pact disappeared. We believe NATO disappeared for some time after the withdrawal from Afghanistan by the United States. And we understand that military blocs do not build nations, they destroy nations. They don't help even protect or defend these countries. But we think the world should be led by wise people who understand the needs of each country, who can balance their own needs according to the needs of others, and rebuild a world where everybody will be living in peace without intervention. I mean, there is no need to invade countries. We have an international system, which is the United Nations, where our fathers have put the basic elements of how we can maintain our world without going back to the tragedies of the Second War or the First World War or to any other wars. Because peoples will always fight for their rights. And these rights have become very definable in the face of new realities and developments in the world. We understand that aggressive policies against China will not help anybody. We believe that the unity of China and the principle of one China is the principle that will prevent conflicts. We don't need more conflicts. We support fully the Chinese right to have independent and developmental issues that will help maintain the role of China in helping others. And we believe that the United States have no right to do whatsoever, whether on Taiwan issue or other problems emanating from the region, because we believe in one China, and that's enough. We had enough wars in the world, enough bloodshedding, which has to stop.
I think what you're saying, to sum it up in short, is the U.S. needs to stop meddling.
I think this is a must. Otherwise, they will involve the American people in wars that will never end. And these wars will definitely cause a bloodshedding in those countries and American bloodshedding. Wars are not one-sided, they are two-sided. And we believe aggressive policies against sovereign countries should stop immediately.
The UN released a report this month warning that Syria might return to large-scale fighting after relative calm. I'm sure you've seen that report. I want to get your thoughts on it, and what is the country doing to mitigate the threat of such a thing?
I don't know who writes these reports, but sometimes they are detached from the reality. I don't want to say that we don't have economic problems. I don't want to say that the terrorist war on Syria has stopped, because we still have Turkish occupation in the north, support of Turkey for terrorist groups, Jabhat al-Nusra, Daesh, among others. And in the northeast, we have military bases and air forces by the United States occupying Hasaka and other parts of Syria, helping some separatist organizations to maintain violence and instability in the country, and having another base in Al-Rukban on the borders between Syria, Iraq, and Jordan. We do believe this is a waste of time, waste of money, waste of efforts, because at the end of the entire game, Syria will regain its sovereignty over all these, occupied parts from Syria, and will eliminate the threat of terrorism. If the United States believes that through using the means of terrorism to weaken Syria will help them, I think they are big losers. They will lose the battle because the international community is united. Some Americans may not believe what I'm saying, that their government is supporting terrorism. But Hillary Clinton, I think a few years ago, said, look, we created Jabhat al-Nusra, we created Al-Qaeda for our own purposes, and this has backfired. Look at what happened here in New York. So if you create the monster, then this monster will not differentiate between you and those whom you instructed him to attack.
How do you think the U.S. went about creating these monsters?
They are creating monsters everywhere. They are responsible for all the destruction that has happened in different parts of the world. I don't think the United States can maintain its interests, can achieve its interest through wars and intervention in the internal affairs, or through the change of governments, as they did in Syria by supporting Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra, among others. So let the people decide what they were. In Syria, a few days ago, we conducted what we call self-administration. More than 20,000 Syrians have run these elections, where Syrians will govern their councils at different local, municipalities and so on. They should have taken this exercise and to believe that we don't want teachers from outside to teach us ways and means of democracy, but we know how are the needs of our societies and behave according to the wishes of the people. We don't want teachers from outside.
You mentioned Turkey a moment ago. The Turkish president and the foreign minister have expressed openness about engagement with the government of President Bashar al-Assad. On a trip you took to Russia last month, you discussed this with the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. What do you see as the steps that need to be taken for a rapprochement?
We welcome the Russian efforts. Even there are Iranian efforts as well. Recently a Astana meeting in Tehran took place. And both presidents, President Putin, President Raisi of Iran, have informed Erdogan that invading other countries will not be helping Turkey solve its own problems. That's why we have never hesitated to have excellent relations between the Syrian people and the Turkish people. A few years ago, I think 2009, 2000, we signed 52 agreements with Turkey. The relation at that time was cordial. Then Erdogan was attracted by the Muslim Brotherhood, who invaded Syria from Turkey. Tens of thousands of foreign fighters entered into Syria and fought the government, destroyed our country, and killed our people, and unnecessarily destabilized the country. What happened now? President Bashar al-Assad and his government is still there. The Syrian people have liberated most of the territories occupied by the terrorists. So now what we want is to go back to the normal relations. As two neighbors, we cannot go on fighting forever. We hope the Turkish government will take wise steps in stopping its support of terrorist organizations, in withdrawing its forces from Idlib and other places, and from the northern parts of Syria, in restoring the flowing of water, of the Euphrates into Syria and Iraq, and stopping interfering in our internal affairs. So this is what we want. If they are ready for this, the Syrian government will be more than willing to achieve stability between the two countries.
Do you see any signs of that?
Until now, no, because attacks are still going on by the Turkish army against our people in the north, building settlements on the borders between the two countries, changing the demographic structure in the northern Syria, or attempts to change it by claiming that they are now building settlements for Syrians. But in fact, they don't want those people from these regions to come to these places, but they want to change the nature of people who are living there. I mean, replacing the people, the original people, with new people who can support their policies. This is wrong, and this will not be sustainable.
You talked about the difficulties with the United States and Turkey. What we have not talked about is Israel, the Israeli airstrikes. There was a recent one at Damascus airport, which, as you know, kind of knocked it out for a time. Can you describe that as an issue and what needs to be done there?
Israel has been built on aggressive policies. Israel has put its petty interests above the needs of the peoples of the Middle East. Israel is subjugating the Palestinian people to its own rules. I don't know where now, after all this building of settlements, where the Palestinian state will be established. This is an issue that was raised today by President Abbas when he addressed the General Assembly. Of course, we support the struggle of the Palestinian people. Israel cannot impose its domination and hegemony over all these countries. Now, they know that in Syria we are fighting the terrorists on the one hand. We are fighting the Turkish occupation on the other hand. We are fighting against Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra and the separatist forces in the northeast. The United States is taking all our wealth, natural wealth. Only during last week, more than 1,000 trucks full of Syrian oil were smuggled into the north of Iraq by the United States. You see the many challenges we are facing, but of course we have our priorities. We shall not allow Israel to determine our priorities. We determine them for ourselves. Sometimes we warn the Israelis against such aggressive policies because they did not attack Damascus airport, destroyed its structures, and disabled it for 13 days. Now in Aleppo they did the same. They have airports, they have infrastructure, and if they believe they will be safe after such attacks, they are wrong.
You mentioned you don't know who writes these reports at the UN with a bit of a smile, but the world you've just described involving Syria, you know that there's a counter-narrative here in the West that runs incredibly different to what you're saying.
Because they are big liars.
But how do you confront that? Because in the Western media, this is not how it's described.
They wanted to effect a regime change since 2011. And now we are in 22. I think we are still there. They failed to achieve by military means what they wanted, and now they want to do it through a different means, which is sanctions, what we call unilateral coercive measures. They are suffocating the Syrian people. These are the people who claim to be humanitarian. Our children do not have enough bread to eat. Our people do not have medicine to be treated with. Our people did not have oil to run our cars in the streets. We don't have the power enough to have electricity. In Damascus, we have 2 hours electricity per day. And not to mention, of course, the other parts of Syria. And they are claiming to be humanitarian. We believe their actions are both inhuman and irrational and are morally unacceptable.
How do you combat that?
We combat that by mobilizing all our resources, by help from our friends, and by a creative means of making these sanctions encourage our people to rebuild another infrastructure to confront these sanctions, with the help of our friends, of course.
You know, everything you just described leads to my next question. The World Food Program says close to 12 million Syrians are dealing with food insecurity. I mean, it comes as...
Yeah, I think, as I told you, we are facing a big problem. Sometimes we don't have enough wheat, to give bread to our people. As I told you, we don't have enough energy resources because the United States control all of them in the northeast of Syria. The wheat, the oil, the water, and other potentials that Syria was dependent on for its own development. We were exporting wheat some years ago. We were exporting oil some years ago. Now all these are occupied by the United States. I think the West should be aware of the crimes being committed under humanitarian slogans in Syria. We don't have enough heat in Syria for our children and for our families.
What can be done? How can you alleviate it?
We are trying to do our best. As I told you again, some of our friends are helping. We are creative enough. But this is also affecting, to be very frank with you, affecting climate change, because the trees are more cut now in Syria by different people, because they cannot accept that their children are dying of cold weather, and the government has to close its eyes sometimes. This is what we call a climate change. In the West, they are trying to say we are fighting against climate change. In 2 weeks, there will be a conference in Egypt, which will be attended by all countries of the world, to say how they can confront climate change, but they must know that the wars launched by the Western countries against sovereign countries, including in Syria, are responsible for such tragic developments.
Syria is committed to achieving its goals for the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. How does that square with the country's priority challenges?
You know, before the war, we were about to achieve all these objectives and goals. Syria was a prosperous country. As I told you, we are growing, 10% per diem, per annum, per year. And we have already achieved many of these goals at that time. Now, I can tell you, there is no development, there is nothing, because of the sanctions and because of the war and the destruction by terrorist groups supported by the United States and Western Europe that destroyed the infrastructure in the whole country. So we need to rebuild the country now.
Let me ask you, I was in Beirut right as the fighting began in your country, and I remember talking to somebody there, and they said, the U.S., the people in the West, they look at it one way, but she had survived the civil war in Lebanon, and she described the suffering and the deaths and what she witnessed, and she said, in the West they can come up with nice little phrases like Arab Spring, but it's really war, that's all it is, and it's suffering and pain.
When you tell any Arab about the Arab Spring, they will laugh.
Well, and I want to get what's going to be, when historians look back at that period of time?
It was Arab disaster. It was Arab catastrophe. Because, what the West wanted is to effect a regime change that will help them dominate the region on the one hand, or divide the one country into different divisions so that they achieve their objectives and the objectives of Israel in the region by weakening all Arab countries. Look at, I mean, what's happening in some Arab countries. Now, elections were held in one Arab country 1 year ago, but they are not able to establish a government. In another Arab country, elections were made, I mean, a few months ago, but there is no prime minister. You see, in Libya, what happened? After the direct invasion by, French, European, NATO forces of Libya, what happened? We don't know when the state of Libya will be re-established. With all respect for the wishes of the Syrian people, but of the Libyan people. But the situation remains very difficult. They are destroying all these countries.
With their foreign policy.
With the foreign policy and with direct force. And when they fail to do it directly, they do it indirectly through Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra. And they claim, no, we don't support such fanatics. But all the money comes to them from these countries. We know it very well.
Big political gathering in China, in Beijing, next month. I want to get your thoughts on that.
China has been hospitable, a lot of Chinese potentials, and that's why China has enjoyed the respect of so many countries in the world, because China has never occupied any country, it has never threatened any country. All the help China is generously giving to different countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have been welcomed by the people without any conditions.
As you head back to Damascus, what will be your final thoughts as you leave New York about the UNGA?
I think we have a new experience. We know the reality better. We have listened how, different countries were mobilized, either in their speeches or, in priorities. We know our friends. We know those who are not with us. But we are determined to contribute to a better world, at least for our people inside Syria, depending on our own national priorities and the help given to us by sincere friends.
Foreign Minister Mekdad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for this special edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.
I see a country